part of it. Um, those of you who are Irish would have heard about Neill. Is it Neill or Niall? Niall.
I think it's Neill because of the name.
Neill is the genitive kid.
Yeah. Well, of course, the O'Neills descend from Niall, so it must have been Neill of the of the 9 hostages. But this book, Margaret gave me for my birthday. I've thrilled to bits with it. It's known as O'Rahilly, the O'Rahilly book. It was written about 1940, I think, 42, 43. 45?
I looked at it.
Oh, you did? Pardon? The title is Early Irish History and Mythology. Thomas F. O'Rahilly, Rahilly. But you'll see references to it all the time in Irish history. They will refer to O'Rahilly as an authority. So this particular book is quite a treasure, and she got it on. Was it eBay or Amazon? Must be eBay. eBay. She'd been looking out because she knew that I'd like that. So it's very good, and I wish I could just read it all to you, but it's the page, the chapter on Niall of the 9 hostages is quite extensive. It's from page 208 to 234, so it's almost 30 pages, about 27, 28 pages. But what I find interesting about O'Rahilly's version of it, he fills in a lot of the things that we learned as kids. Growing up in Ireland, Niall of the 9 hostages is a romantic figure. They always show him on a white horse, and he was killed by lightning, but we're not quite sure where, except we do know that it was not in Ireland, and we do know that it was in a mountainous area, and some of the school books tell about him being killed by lightning in the Alps. So there's a persistent myth, if that's the right word, that he was like Alexander the Great, Genghis Khan. He was a great leader and actually formed an empire. So it's hard to know where to stop with the romanticism and who was the real Neill. But starting with the story that kids are told in Ireland, that he was a great king, and he was the king who brought back the young Patrick as a slave to Ireland, and that probably is what most people think of when they think of Niall of the nine hostages, that he was a raider and raided the island of Britain at the end of the 4th century and early 5th century, namely 380, 90 something and 4 something. So if St. Patrick came to Ireland in 432, which is fairly well documented, and he had been wandering, well, not wandering, but anyway, he'd been in Europe becoming a bishop and so on for at least 20 years, maybe better, he would have come to Ireland as a slave in the very early 400s. And he may well have been gone for 30 odd years before he came back, because we know he was not a young man when he came back. So we know that, or we have a fairly good documentation of Niall dying around 428. So he would have died before Patrick came back as a grown man, as a bishop. And by then, of course, he had been succeeded by various sons. And the son who was High King of Ireland was Niall's son, and his name was Lyra.
I thought it was his grandson.
I think it was his son. I think so. It's generally, at least, and I would never argue with O'Rahilly. I wouldn't argue with O'Neill either, but
You did it one meeting.
oh, I did, yeah. So I was brave. He'll spend the rest of his life proving me wrong on that. But no, I think O'Leary was his son, and his sons pretty well controlled all of Ireland between them, and each of the sons inherited different parts of Ireland, and the different areas of Ireland are traceable back to the sons of Niall. Like, for instance, one of them was Owen, and another one was Connell. And those of you who know a little about Irish history know that the ancient name for the county Tyrone, which would be larger than the present county, although it's a fairly large county, was Tyr, meaning the country of Owen, and Owen was the son of Niall. And Donegal is known as Tyr Connell today. In fact, on Irish maps, it won't say Donegal, it is Tyr Connell. So there's a good example of the sons of Niall having inherited sections of a much, much larger kingdom that he controlled. There's no doubt that he controlled all of Ireland. He was a very powerful king. He controlled not only all of Ireland, but there's very, very strong evidence that he controlled a great part of Britain, certainly all of Scotland, and right down well into southern England. So we don't know how much, and of course, then there's some evidence a little less compelling, but certainly there in tradition, that he not only controlled both islands, but had quite a large hunk on the continent as well. And the possibility that may be true is based on not only the traditions associating him with those places, but that he followed the receding Roman Empire, Romans. And we do know that the Angles and the Saxons didn't come in till later. The Romans were quite well gone before the Angles and the Saxons came in. So the island of Britain would have been in a state of vacuum, that the Romans had withdrawn and there really wasn't any strong native power, whereas Ireland had been uninvaded by the Romans, had a very strong chieftain system and a very strong high kingship system, and would have been much, much stronger than the native inhabitants of the island of Britain, because they had been subjugated for 400 years, which is a long time. So it's perfectly possible that he was able to dominate, if not all, large sections of the island of Britain, because, as you know, the old Celtic, whatever you want to call them, inhabitants of Britain were pretty well wiped out much earlier than that, shortly after the time of Christ. And Boudica, was really the last great queen. And in France, Vercingetorix, would have. So that the Celts, the old chieftainship system was almost forgotten by Niall's time, by the year 400, when the Romans were in retreat out of the island of Ireland, or Britain rather. So it's perfectly possible that an Irish king would easily, maybe not even have been resisted, may even be welcomed, because they were bringing back some of what had been theirs prior to Roman times. So may have been very well received by the essentially old Celtic peoples of Britain. And it's interesting that the the hostages that he did bring back, and Patrick wasn't a Celt as such. He was a Roman, so he was he perhaps didn't burn villages. He raided Roman strongholds, which of course made a lot of sense because they had a lot more to raid and to bring back. So so all of that would fit quite well. The more modern Christian interpretations of him, actually, I think that's where him having been killed in the Alps may have originated from the scribes and the monks at later times, because they say that he was helping the Romans, that the reason he was in the Alps and in the Rhine Valley and the Danube area there